This is the Big O Show. This is the Big O Show.
All righty, there we go. There he is, the man that is hurting like a lot of us.
That was a rough one. That was a rough one, Big O. I'm sure you've been talking about it all morning. I was out at the bar for that one, so thankfully I had a drink in my hand while that was going down. Tough watch, but there's, maybe it's a bit much to say that it's a blueprint that defenses are now employing against Miami's passing game. But I mean, you've seen it 2 weeks in a row now, right? Kind of flood in the middle of the field, making those throws extremely difficult.
You got to adjust. If San Fran did it to you, then you should have anticipated that the Chargers are going to do it to you. So then you need to have the adjustment for it. And so last week, I don't blame McDaniel for the loss. I blame Tua. This week, I blame Tua, McDaniel, and some of the receivers also screwed up too in a couple of the routes and a couple balls. Even Tyreek, who scored 2 touchdowns, had a couple of screw ups there that were kind of weird for him. But it was. I mean, they freaking choked, dude. I mean, that's all.
I mean,
that's all
credit to the Chargers too. Credit to the Chargers, because the Chargers were, not only did they sort of follow, like, it's one thing for San Francisco to do a thing to you, because that's an extremely talented defense. They give you no time. They've got great pass rushers. It's another thing for the Chargers to do it to you. We've been a totally underwhelming defense most of the season, really vulnerable to the run, vulnerable to big plays, which of course we saw with Tyreek eventually. Tough one though. They were dropping guys. It looked, again, I'm watching this game with a beer in hand at the bar. But it certainly looked like they were doing a nice job giving one look at the snap of the football, dropping people immediately, making the middle of the field really, really busy for Tua. And you're right. I mean, there's not much more to say than that he's going to have to adjust, and he's got to do it now in a short week with a really difficult opponent on the schedule.
You really should have won last week and this week, and then if you lose to Buffalo, it's not a big deal. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's not a big deal, but it's weird. And Tyreek is injured, and yet
Tyreek dinged on a short week. Jeff Wilson hurt on a short week.
But he still
that seems rough.
Touchdowns injured. Okay.
I will say that there's not a play that I saw in week 14 that I enjoyed more than Teron Armstead flipping that ball out of the scrum to Tyreek. That was like, I mean, I don't know. There were a lot of great throws, a lot of great passes in week 14. That was the greatest assist that I saw in week 14, was Armstead seemingly deliberately finding Tyreek outside the scrum to set up that touchdown. That was awesome.
All right. If you guys got fantasy football questions, send them in now on the Welt and Rayom text line. Is a lot easier for me to find them at 855-912-1056. That's 855-912-1056. Again, on the YouTube chat board, you can start sending them in now. So for those of you that are there, and don't forget to smash the hell out of the like button, man. By the way, J.K. Dobbins looks like a guy you got to start riding.
Yeah, it was great to see. I think that the Ravens are now fully back to their Dobbins, Gus Edwards, two-headed attack. Gus wasn't bad this week, but Dobbins really, I mean, that was a great show from him. And it seems like they certainly made the right decision for him to go back in and get the arthroscopic surgery, get cleaned up, and he looked great. I mean, he's a hyper-talented player, and that's a team that we know wants to run the football, run it all day. And they've got some nice spots ahead too. Like, this is a really nice end-of-season schedule for Baltimore. So Dobbins is somebody who's actually he's lingering out there in about 30% of Yahoo leagues. So he's not somebody who really makes the pickups column, because that's not a lot of availability. But you should check. You should check the wire just to be sure that Dobbins is rostered somewhere.
All right, get ready. Do you trade Waddle?
Do I assume we're talking fantasy and not reality?
Yeah. I'm pretty sure they're talking fantasy now, but this is what's coming now. So
two rough games for Waddle in a row, obviously. And I thought you were alluding to the receivers with some I don't know if they were boneheaded plays, but some lost opportunities in the Chargers game. I thought that deep throw late in the game, was Waddle just not was he not looking for? I mean, a ball sailed like a foot over his head, right? Like he had a clear opportunity late in that game for a splash play. Not playing well. He obviously had the ankle injury a couple weeks ago. It's not certain that that's bothering him anymore. No, I don't like you never trade at a low point, right? Like, I mean, if you're for some reason your trade deadline hasn't passed, you don't like to trade at moments like this. Ideally you trade when a player's value is high. Do I expect huge things from him against Buffalo? No, I mean, you're probably looking at like a 24-21 game, 21-17, something like that, right? This is probably not going to be a game where the total ends up in the 60s or anything like that. But no, I wouldn't sell him here. I still think he's a pretty unique talent. And I don't think you're going to get value for a guy selling this low.
All right. Chase Barrett is asking, is Etienne unstartable until proven otherwise? He's been terrible, but then also plays Houston in the championship weekend. How do you look at this?
I look at this as a guy coming off, like the Jaguars did exactly what we would expect a defense to do against, or an offense to do against a defense that is as lopsided as Tennessee has been, right? Like Tennessee's been really good against the run, and they've been completely vulnerable against the pass. And Trevor Lawrence had a day. Like he's a young quarterback kind of coming into his own, and the game is slowing down for him. And Lawrence was great. It was never a great setup for Etienne. I mean, I'm trying to think of where I had him in the ranks going into the week, but it was even with 6 teams on bye, I think he was like my RB 17 or 18. I mean, it just wasn't a good matchup, and he didn't have much of a game. But he's got Houston ahead, and Houston has been an absolute gift to running backs. So I wouldn't sweat that at all. He's also got the Cowboys coming up this week, and the Cowboys have been super vulnerable to running backs, and they're allowing a lot of missed tackles too. So it's a handful of great matchups for Etienne. I certainly wouldn't sweat that. If that's your biggest problem, you don't really have many problems.
Is Bam Knight a starter moving forward? Brandon Rowd is asking.
Here's a good example of somebody who I wouldn't necessarily start ahead of, Travis Etienne, but I can imagine flex. I mean, if you've got him, you're probably riding him. You're probably flexing him. He's got Detroit coming up. That's not a scary matchup, although they just, shut the door on Dalvin Cook more or less. So I'd continue to play him. I mean, he's one of the few guys out there that is in line in a normal week for like 17, 20, 24 touches, right? It's him and Michael Carter, and they left James Robinson inactive again this week. So sure, in most leagues of any depth, I'd say, yeah, he's a starter moving forward.
Would you start Tua against the Bills?
This just pains me. I would want alternatives, and I don't think he's gonna. He's been ranking as a top 10 fantasy QB all season for us, basically after those first few weeks. I don't think it's going to be the case this week against the Bills, especially now that we've seen a couple defenses in a row. One of them great, one of them not great. Really shut him down and give him all kinds of problems. I'm sure Buffalo can do that. So I don't think he's going to rank as a top 10 option. This all depends on the various options that you have. I wouldn't go to the waiver wire and get like Mike White or Ryan Tannehill or even Brock Purdy or whatever. Like I would still ride with Tua there because he is, after all, the guy who's throwing to Waddle and Tyreek Hill. So I wouldn't sit him for just anyone, but I can tell you that he's not gonna be top 10 for me.
Evan Ingram. What are we doing with Evan Ingram in Jacksonville now?
How fun was that? It felt as if all the fantasy points that Evan Ingram has been leaving on the field his entire career, he scooped up and scored them in week 14, right? Like that was really something. That says a lot about Tennessee. Peppered him with targets. It was great to see. Evan Ingram's had a really good year, and Evan Ingram, I don't know if you and I have talked about it, but I feel like I've had this conversation several times this season. Like Evan Ingram was a buzzy story in the summer from the people who were covering the Jaguars. He was, he had that like first guy in the building, last guy out thing going for him, all kinds of work with Lawrence, a lot of rapport with Lawrence. Every day you'd see a clip of Evan Ingram, with a splashy red zone catch. So I think this is all of that work coming to fruition. It's the best game he's going to have this season, but that's fine. I think he's somebody who is generally in line for something like 6 to 10 targets in any given week, and there's just not a lot of that at the tight end position. So Ingram is definitely someone who's going to rank as a top 10 player at the spot going forward.
That's a current Jag. Let's talk about a former Jag that's in Detroit in DJ Chark. How are we looking at DJ Chark now?
That's a really fun offense. This isn't a great week for them. They've got the Jets coming up. Obviously, that Jets defense, that front will get after you. The secondary is great. So I don't love him necessarily in week 15, but this is 2 games with serious target totals, 2 games in a row in which he's gone over 90 receiving yards. He's got a touchdown now in 2 of his last 3. And yeah, Jared Goff's playing great. Like in any given week, it's not really much of a surprise if Jared Goff gives us a couple of touchdowns and 300 yards. The spot to really use Chark, I think, moving forward, they've got in most fantasy leagues settle their championship in week 17. He's got the Bears in week 17, and the Bears are, the Bears began the season as a bad defense, and they deliberately got worse by trading away some pieces. They've had some injuries. DJ Chark is exactly the sort who can exploit that. So he's somebody that I would be looking to flex, looking to put in a wide receiver 3 spot in championship week for sure.
Pep is asking 1 flex and 1 RB2 for week 15. Jamal Williams, Rashard White, James Cook, Olave, or Deontay Johnson?
Yeah, I think I want to play White and Olave here. Olave's just been wonderful all season. He's been a great story. It's just a great rookie receiver class, and he's been about the best of them. It's an exploitable matchup against Atlanta, so Olave is an easy play for me. And then I would keep rolling with Rashad White. A bit of a fantasy step backward for James Cook this past week after seeing 20 touches the week before. So I think I would trust Rashad White, who is, the running game for Tampa Bay obviously hasn't been great. The matchup this past weekend didn't help, but to me, Leonard Fournette just looks like he's running in sand. And I think White is the better option for that team. He's a wonderful receiving threat too.
He had a holding call back a big-ass touchdown. But Brandon is asking, is Mike Evans droppable at this time?
Droppable? I don't know. If you're playing in an 8-team league, I guess he's droppable, where you only start 2 receivers, something like that. But in most leagues, Mike Evans is not droppable. I mean, that that really stung when you said that, because I've got Mike Evans in a couple leagues where I need, Did long
you see
touchdown.
That touchdown they called back?
Brutal, absolutely brutal. It was the play of the season from Mike Evans, whose year has been littered with drops and miscommunications with Brady, and they finally connect on a deep ball. Nobody else in the camera frame, and we get a holding call that negates it. So that's it's perfectly in line with the rest of his season. But no, I wouldn't drop him. He's got the Bengals coming up. That's a frisky defense, but they did just lose Hendrickson up front. So we'll see. I mean, Mike Evans still should be a premier red zone target. He was last year. He's just having the worst season of his career.
Chris Moore from Houston. Has he become a flex with the injuries to Nico and the boys?
I think I mean, you said it. I think it's really a function of the injuries elsewhere. I wouldn't count on anything from Brandon Cooks rest of season, but I think Nico Collins probably comes back. And when he does, I don't think that's a passing game that can support more than one, exciting startable receiver. If I were stashing anyone, I'm just thinking of some of the names that are on the waiver wire right now in a lot of leagues. I'd want Mecole Hardman ahead of him. Mecole Hardman has a chance to come back this week. And if that happens, he was basically he turned into a huge part of the goal line offense before his injury, right? He had 5 touchdowns in his last 3 games. So he would be a little bit more interesting to me. You mentioned DJ Chark. He would be a little bit more interesting to me. Jahan Dotson, Washington, saw 9 targets before his bye. He'd be a little more interesting as well.
Okay. Question is, Waddle and Evans have been my number 1 wide receivers in 2 all year. Should I start leaning on my bench with Devonta Smith, Ayuk, and Judy as we head into the playoffs?
I will say, I mean, shoot, Jerry Jeudy was on a lot of fantasy benches this week, and I'm sure I told people to bench him. Had a monster week, had 3 touchdowns. Denver entered that game averaging 13.8 points per game on the season. That has been who they are for most of the year. So I think you just tip your cap to Jerry Jeudy and say that's a job well done. I'm not imagining that it's going to happen again and again and again. So I don't think I'd go to Jeudy. Devontae Smith is super interesting, though, because that's just that offense is scoring 35, 40 points a week, right? And Devontae is a huge part of it because it's kind of down to Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown in that passing game. So Devontae Smith is certainly someone that you can feel good about. Well, I haven't done my ranks yet for week 15, but Devontae ahead of Mike Evans and possibly Waddle as well seems plausible to me. So Devontae is the most tempting name from that list.
Where are we at with Jordan Mason?
Cleanup duty for him in the, what a weird game, right? Like obviously the Niners were favored. The Niners are a very good team, but to just pummel Tampa Bay like that. But like we didn't see that much of Jordan Mason until it was just mop up duty. So I would expect it to be like that moving forward. They've got a quick turnaround. They've got an even quicker turnaround than you guys do. They play on Thursday at Seattle this week. Mason is really just somebody that you might count on for like 8 to 10 carries. Probably not a lot of action as a receiver. Probably going to spell Christian McCaffrey a little bit, but he's a secondary option for that team for sure. He's somebody that you can stash and maybe it'll pay off down the road, but it would really require an injury to McCaffrey.
All right. Tell them a little bit about Yahoo Sports, my friend. How do you get everybody else involved there as we get ready for the playoffs?
Yeah. Playoffs. Okay. We're like must-win weeks coming up. I've got a pickups column coming out tomorrow morning. Look for that at sports.yahoo.com/fantasy. And we've got a pickups podcast that I'm going to record here in a couple hours with Matt Harmon too.
By the way, they're asking Ravens or Jets D this week.
Oh, that's a fun one. I'd probably go Ravens. Again, the Jets face the Lions, and the Lions have been the Lions are one of the best offenses in football. And that isn't even new. Like they're on this little winning tear right now, but they were a great offense early in the season when they were giving up a zillion points.
They've won 5 of 6.
Wild. So Dan Campbell's fun. Dan Campbell's really fun.
He is fun, I gotta say, yeah. And doing even better than I thought he would do because I never really buy that rah.
I don't either. But when it works and it comes in a package like this, it's pretty fun.
Right. He makes it fun. There's no doubt about that. And you know what? The thing about Dan, he looks like a cool dude.
Yeah,
like a guy you want to hang out with. Like most coaches. They look kind of boring, and there's a couple of guys you might want to hang out with, but there's a lot of those guys you probably don't want to hang around with. Dan Campbell's one of those guys you want to hang around with.
Oh, I know. Dan Campbell's somebody that is still like he still hangs out with like all his junior high friends, all his high school friends, right?
Right.
They just open somebody's garage and sit around and drink beer when he's in the off season.
He's still bullshitting with the fellas, which is
I love that
actually really, really cool. All right, follow him on Twitter at Andy Behrens, and of course catch his work there at at Yahoo Sports. That is, I was going to say sports. What? Yahoo Sports. Check it out there as always. Andy,
I gave you too much gibberish. Thanks, Big O.
Catch up next week, my friend. Thank you. There you go. Brother. Andy Behrens, as we head into the playoffs. Remember, Scott Pianowski will join us on Friday, Mondays and Fridays at noon with our Sports Grill Fantasy Football Zone.